The sun's first light filtered through the dense canopy of trees, casting long ghostly shadows across the Harper farmhouse. The police had cordoned off the area, and forensic teams were busy combing through the house. Emily stood outside with her parents, wrapped in a blanket that felt far too thin against the chill of the early morning. Her mother, Lydia Harper, had tears in her eyes as she held Emily close. "Thank God you're okay," she whispered, her voice trembling. Her father, Tom Harper, paced back and forth, his face a mask of anger and concern. As the police began their investigation, Emily was taken aside for a more thorough questioning. Despite her exhaustion, she recounted every detail she could remember, her voice breaking as she described the terrifying moments in the attic. The officers listened carefully, jotting down notes and exchanging glances. One officer, Detective Karen Blake, looked at Emily with a mixture of sympathy and professional interest. "You did well to stay hidden and escape. It's a miracle you made it out without serious injury." Emily nodded, too drained to respond. The reality of what had happened was still sinking in, each moment replaying in her mind like a relentless nightmare. The once familiar farmhouse now felt alien and menacing. As the day wore on, the police found disturbing evidence in the house, personal items of the Harper family, meticulously arranged in unsettling ways. It was clear that the intruders had a personal vendetta. The items, scattered in the living room and upstairs, told a story of obsession and malice. In the hours that followed, Emily's parents made arrangements for them to stay elsewhere. They decided to go to a nearby relative's house while the police continued their investigation. The thought of leaving the farmhouse, their home, was painful, but safety came first. Emily lay awake that night in the guest room of her aunt's house, staring at the ceiling. Every creak of the house seemed amplified, and the shadows on the walls danced with the memories of the previous night. Sleep eluded her as her mind replayed the events in an endless loop. The next morning, Detective Blake visited Emily and her family at their temporary residence. "We've identified the intruders," she said, her expression grim. "Their records indicate they were involved in a series of similar incidents, but this was the first time they targeted a family specifically. We're still piecing together their motives." Emily's heart sank. The idea that this had been part of a pattern of attacks only added to her fear. "Do they have any connection to us?" she asked. "We're still investigating that," Blake replied. "For now, you should focus on your recovery. We'll keep you informed of any updates." As the days passed, Emily tried to return to some semblance of normalcy. Her parents were deeply involved in repairing the house and dealing with insurance claims. Emily attended therapy sessions to help process the trauma. But the echoes of that night continued to haunt her. The farmhouse was gradually repaired, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over her. She found herself avoiding certain rooms and jumping at every unexpected sound. The once comforting familiarity of her home had been tainted by fear. One evening, as Emily was sitting alone in her room, she noticed something strange. A photograph on her bedside table, one she remembered placing in a drawer, had been moved. Her heart raced as she checked the drawer and found it empty. The photograph was the only thing missing. She felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. Had the intruders left a message? Her imagination raced as she considered the possibilities. To calm herself, she decided to check the house's security system, which had been repaired after the break-in. As she reviewed the footage, Emily's heart nearly stopped. In one of the clips, she saw a shadowy figure entering the house while the power was out. But the footage ended abruptly. The timestamp indicated it was from the night of the invasion, but there was nothing else. No more footage from that night. Panic surged through Emily. She contacted Detective Blake immediately, her voice trembling as she explained the situation. Blake assured her that they would look into it and offered to increase patrols in the area. The feeling of being watched never left Emily. Despite the increased security and the presence of police, she often felt a lingering, oppressive gaze. Every corner of the farmhouse seemed to hold a hidden threat. The wind howled through the tall, skeletal trees, their gnarled branches scratching against the windows of the Harper farmhouse like skeletal fingers. Inside, the house was a cocoon of warmth and light, the only sign of life in the vast sea of darkness surrounding it. Emily Harper settled onto the couch, her favorite blanket draped over her shoulders as she flipped through channels on the TV. The house had never felt so quiet, so isolated. Her parents had left for their weekend getaway, and she was determined to enjoy her time alone. Just a quiet night, she told herself, trying to ignore the oppressive silence that seemed to press in from all sides. The power flickered briefly, then stabilized. Emily dismissed it as a mere glitch and continued watching a movie. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, she reluctantly turned off the TV and headed to bed. In the darkened hallway, a faint creak echoed from the attic, a sound she had grown accustomed to but never truly acknowledged. She shrugged it off, attributing it to the old house settling. With a final glance at the dim glow of her phone charging on the bedside table, she drifted into sleep. But the tranquility was short-lived. A sudden jarring thud jolted Emily awake. She sat up, her heart pounding. The power went out, plunging the house into darkness. Emily's phone screen was the only source of light as she fumbled for her flashlight. A chill swept through the room, and she felt a prickling sensation on the back of her neck. The quiet was now thick, with an unsettling tension. Emily glanced at her phone, its screen flickering erratically. She tried to call her parents, but the call was met with only static. A series of muffled sounds came from downstairs, footsteps, whispers, and the faint clang of metal. Emily's pulse quickened. The noise grew louder, more deliberate. Someone, or something, was moving around the house. With trembling hands, she grabbed the flashlight and crept out of her room. The beam cut through the oppressive darkness, revealing the familiar yet now sinister layout of the hallway. The shadows danced on the walls, twisted and malevolent. As she descended the stairs, the noises grew clearer, a rhythmic thud, 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 like something being dragged across the floor. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she reached the bottom of the stairs, and the front door came into view. The door was ajar. Emily's mind raced. She remembered the back door had been bolted tight before she went to bed. Her heart sank as she noticed muddy footprints leading inside, evidence of an unwelcome presence. She moved to the kitchen, where she found the back door slightly open. The lock had been tampered with. Panic set in as she realized the gravity of the situation. Someone had broken into the house. Emily's thoughts raced as she turned to check the security cameras. The screen showed nothing but static, a flickering mess of white noise. Her heart pounded as she understood. The intruders had cut the power, severing her last link to the outside world. Every creak, every whisper from the shadows seemed to amplify the fear clawing at her insides. She could hear faint, almost indistinguishable murmurs coming from the darkened corners of the house. She had to act quickly. With the flashlight in one hand and her phone in the other, Emily moved silently through the house, searching for a place to hide. The invaders were close. She could feel their presence like a tangible weight in the air.